Unfortunately, my mother passed away. I was supposed to get the inheritance from her. However, my stepfather, he's coming up with all these bogus claims saying, oh no, the money's going to him and he's going to look after it. Well, little did I know, he was planning a gigantic wedding at one of the most expensive venues in the entire city for his daughter, and guess whose money he was going to use to pay for it? That's right, mine! I lived in a small picturesque town, along with my family. I had a meager paying job that was enough for me to get by, although my mother was affluent. She lived close by in a 3-story building alone with my stepdad, Max, and my stepsister, Chloe. My mother had married Max after my dad died when I was 2, and they had Chloe. From time to time, my mother would help me out with money whenever needed. I was happy, going on about my daily life up until a tragic event, the death of my mother. Not only did it wreck my happiness, but also wrecked me financially, as my mom was the pillow I could fall back on for anything. She was my pillar of support against my stepfather. He never liked me that much. Come to think of it, he never really liked or got along with anyone. I would come to know why now. Ever since my mom passed away a few days ago, I've been feeling all kinds of emotions. It's like I'm lost and struggling to cope with everything. Every day is a challenge, as sadness keeps overwhelming me, but I refuse to give up. I'm holding on to memories I have of my mom, both the happy ones and the ones that bring tears. Those memories give me strength and remind me of her love. But my mom loved and cared enough for me to leave a large amount of inheritance for me in her will. Her will was no secret amongst our family. After having such an enormous amount of money to her name, she was bound to make a will to safeguard her money should anything happen to her. She had hired a lawyer named Peter, who worked tirelessly with her on making this will ironclad. I would receive a sizable amount from the inheritance, enough to suffice me for years on. I had my job, too, on top of it. I would lead a quiet and peaceful life. But that did not seem the case, as in the days to come my stepfather found out about the inheritance I would be receiving. He had none to his name. My stepsister had the same amount as me to her name, but none for stepfather. After Max, my stepdad, got to know about this, he had a cunning plan set in motion. He invited me to tea one day. I was also to collect the inheritance papers that had been kept in my mom's safe, and so I went. There was an air of seriousness and envy around him when I arrived. I greeted them both with a smile on my face. This would be the first time I would be seeing them after my mom's funeral. I had barely had the chance to have a word with them then. Now seemed the perfect time to get word in about the inheritance papers. Chloe went upstairs and was left alone with Max. Max seemed sad and sat upright. He said he's really sorry about it, but I cannot have the inheritance papers. My blood ran cold. He continued saying that the will's quite vague and there's no mention as to whether I should get the inheritance or whether Chloe should get it. Well, I sat there dumbfounded. I asked him to prove it then, show me the will papers, and he said he cannot do that as the papers are kept in a private safe at the bank, and him being my mom's husband was the only one who could access it now. He threw in a few statements about me doubting his words. I had no other option but to leave. So, I got home and laid in bed for a few hours, thinking about what was going to happen to me now and how was I going to sustain myself. Without that inheritance, I would barely be able to make ends meet and would probably have to get a second job. Eventually, I broke down into tears as I was confused about all that's happened. I'd lost my mom, my inheritance, I'd lost about everything. A few days passed by and I was trying to go on with my life, working 2 jobs, trying to make ends meet and sustain myself, and I got an invitation for my stepsister's wedding. She was getting married in about 2 months. Not a lot of surprise there. She'd been dating her boyfriend for about 3 years now, and what came as a shock was that her wedding was going to happen in a very big venue. It was going to be a huge party, with lots of people attending. Family members and friends from both sides of the family. I was suspicious about it as I knew my stepdad barely had anything to be able to afford his wedding, and the stepsister's inheritance was not enough to cover the whole cost. I suspected it had something to do with my part as well, and so I dropped by to see them both and discuss it. The house was buzzing with activities and wedding preparations. I also witnessed a change in my stepdad and stepsister. It seemed as they had forgotten all about my mom and was now enjoying the money that my mom left them. Max greeted me with what seemed like a plastic smile on his face. It also looked like he knew what I had come for, and so he said it before I could even say a word. He was using the inheritance money my mom had left me to throw Chloe a grand wedding. He said she deserves it after all that's happened. What's with, Emily passing away and the grief that they've been through. Chloe played along and said she was indeed happy that the bad times were over and that their future now no longer looked bleak. I didn't know what to say, so I gave up and left. That night, as I lay in bed, I went over all that happened in my mind. I was robbed of my inheritance, and here I was, working 2 jobs to sustain myself, while my stepfather was out there throwing Chloe some sort of grand wedding with my inheritance money. I was suspicious of his words about the unclear terms in my mom's will, and I knew something was up. It felt like Max had concocted this whole plan on how to snatch up my inheritance and use it for his own means. I knew I had to do something about it. I knew I did. I had to get my inheritance back somehow and began planning. I would have to get in touch with my mom's lawyer, Peter, and discuss with him about the will. I also knew something was up about my stepdad, and so decided to speak to a few family members or family friends who had cut us off because of him. I met up with James, a family friend who cut us off for a reason I would not get to know. Well, until now. James and I met for coffee at a local cafe and started recounting the details of what happened. Max was in need of urgent money for paying Chloe's school fees. James, however, knew Emily had more than enough to take care of it, but Max had come up with an excuse for that too. They had run out of their savings and Emily would be paid in just a few weeks, and so they had no means to pay for the fees and Chloe would have to stop going to school. Well, James took a bit of pity on Chloe and gave a few $1,000s cash up front. Cold, hard cash. Max was thankful and said he would return it all when Emily got her salary later. But he did the unthinkable. He disappeared with the money and blocked James. James got to know from friends that Max had spent all the money gambling instead, and the story about Chloe's school fees was made up, as Emily had already paid it. James figured he was not going to get back his money and just cut Emily and Max off. He had made a mistake because of which he had been in debt for months, but he learned his lesson. I thanked James for telling me this information and told him about how Max had taken my inheritance and was now throwing Chloe some grand wedding like Cinderella. James, too, felt angry about it, as I did, and said he would help in any way he can. He also told me to talk to Simon, another such friend of whom I was unaware was estranged by my stepdad's actions. I met up with Simon not long after, and he too told me about how Max had also deceived him under the pretense of he needed money for a very urgent matter. Simon, being a good friend of Emily's, gave it up in hopes that he would get it back, only to find out later that he's been blocked and his money being used for leisure activities. Of Max, of course. Simon, too, decides to cut Emily and Max off at this point, and has not spoken to them ever since. I told him about my inheritance and how Max had snatched it from me. So he spoke in my support. He probed me to talk to Peter and said Peter was a great lawyer, and together with his support I would be able to get my money back. He also said he would chip in to support me when needed. I thanked him and said I would indeed keep in touch with him and James. those two being the only people I could honestly trust now. So, I decided it was finally time to meet the infamous lawyer who helped me create my mom's will. He would know explicit details about it, which would be crucial for me getting back my inheritance. I called Peter over to discuss everything with him. Peter had come over to my house after his work, and we sat down as he spoke about Emily. Not only was he a lawyer, he had become her close friend. He had helped her manage her account and finances and often advised her on non-trivial matters as well. Peter and Emily would have long afternoon talks during tea. Peter seemed like a good lawyer and a good person too. I told Peter about my inheritance, and Peter confirmed I should be able to get it without any issue. I then told him about how Max told me about the uncertain terms of the will and how I would not be able to claim the inheritance and instead Max would claim it, and how Max is using that inheritance money to pay for the grand wedding for Chloe. I told him about how I was working 2 jobs to sustain myself and how I wanted to find a way to rightfully claim my inheritance back from my cunning stepfather. Peter listened intently to my words and said he needed to take a look at the will to advise me further. We would go on from there. It was left to me to obtain the papers of the will. This time, however, I was smart and contacted the bank myself. They told me, as her offspring, I could access the will's paper kept in the safe. I thanked the bank and informed them what my stepdad had told me about him being the only person who can access the will papers. They told me that either my mom's partner or her offspring or her lawyer can access them. I should have figured what Max had said about this would have been a lie. I went over to the bank and collected the papers. As I skimmed through them, I realized I indeed needed Peter's help in understanding the legal terms, which eluded me. So, we decided to meet again to discuss the terms of the will and plot a revenge against my stepdad. Peter was going over the terms carefully and finding any statement that would support me or any statements about the terms of who would get the inheritance that was mentioned in the will. I, however, am feeling skeptical about it, as I am but a simple man who just wanted his inheritance money that his mother had left him. All the plotting and planning had made me feel like a bad person for doing what I am about to do to my stepfather. Should I just let it go, or should I fight to get my inheritance back? My mom had saved up all her hard-earned money and had willed it to me. It was wrong the way how my stepdad usurped it, and here I am asking all you guys this. Am I the a-hole for getting revenge on my stepdad who cut me off from my late mom's inheritance, claiming my stepsister needed the money for her grand wedding? What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. Today's story is that of a drama. Can you believe this guy's trying to take all of OP's inheritance for a wedding? Well, I do have 2 updates for you guys. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button for daily videos, and let's go ahead and jump into update number 1. An update for you guys. Peter filed a case in a nearby court and had fought fiercely. Max, however, seemed smug and was somehow getting away with it all, saying that the terms in the will were not clear. Peter and I would have to come up with something to prove his statement wrong. Within the next few days, Peter approached me with some information about my mother's will. He told me that Emily did not truly trust Max, and she had an inkling that Max was not a good person as he had made himself out to be. He also added that Max did not have a good relationship with anyone other than Emily. I know James and Simon could corroborate this. Peter said that Emily often told him about how she felt Max was with her just for the money, and so she decided to make that will. Peter was excited about what he had said next. He said he found a secret clause that my mother had added in the will just for me. The clause explicitly stated that should anything suspicious occur, the inheritance would exclusively belong to me. I was overjoyed. This bit of information was a game changer. I now felt confident that I could get my inheritance, which I deserve, back from Max, who was going to spend it all on a wedding which my mom would never have liked. This revelation not only strengthened my resolve, but would also equip me with all the support I needed to combat my stepdad's, machinations. But before that, we needed proper proof and evidence to submit in court, and prove that there were suspicious activities with my mother's will and the rightful heir to the inheritance was not able to claim it. Together with Peter, I would have to come up with a proper plan on how I can get my revenge against Max. So, we started gathering witnesses and evidences that was required. After we had gathered all evidence, a date for a hearing was set, and the court case was held. It was not an easy day for Max and Chloe. Peter, the lawyer representing me, and Max had gotten a lawyer to represent himself and Chloe. The hearing ahead of us was long and tough on both of us. Max sat there listening to all that was said against him. The truth had finally come out, and it was destroying him. I also witnessed a sad look on Chloe's face. I would apologize to her later. She had been caught up in the middle of all of it. It made me sad to do what I was doing, to be honest, but I needed to set things right. In the back of my mind, I had a feeling that what I was doing was wrong. I feel like if I do this, I might lose people I knew my whole life. The inheritance money would ensure that I had a good future, but it might as well end up destroying Max and Chloe's lives. Max and Chloe's relatives, who had also become my family when Mom married Max, would come to hate me for uprooting their lives. I feel troubled by those thoughts, knowing what I'm about to do may as well cause me to lose the only family I have right now. It would make me rich, but Chloe would also suffer because of this rift between Max and I. Our first witness was James, an old estranged family friend. He would give his statement about how Max had manipulated and lied into giving him the money. He would also add how he had been pushed into debt by my stepfather's actions. James' testimony is useful in helping build a case as to how my stepfather was not a person to be trusted. Our second witness was Simon, who, like James, had also lost money to stepfather's actions, and he too suffered from it. His testimony would help build a case where it showed a pattern of distrust and manipulation against my stepfather. I would also add my testimony, where I was juggling 2 jobs after my inheritance got snatched away from me. I would also tell all the details and report my stepfather's exact words about there being uncertain terms of the will, so he would claim it for now. I would also add how I learned from the bank about him lying about who could access the will papers. Peter also would testify against my stepfather by telling what Emily had told him about how she does not really trust Max. He would then bring up the secret clause of the will and conclude how my stepfather had manipulated me into believing his words and had taken over my inheritance. The secret clause would then be exercised in the situation, and I would get my inheritance back as I was rightfully owned. I also had gathered evidence from the clubs that Max went to, where he would just gamble and lose all of James and Simon's money. I also had ample evidence from several salons, showrooms, malls that he went to and spent huge amounts of money. The evidence and testimonies against him were ironclad as the secret clause in the will. Peter and I had finally looked in bank accounts of my stepdad, hoping to find some significant information there that could help our case. That's when I realized that my stepdad had been stealing a small sum of money from my mother for a long time. The nerve of him. After the final evidence of the secret clause was presented, the judge put the court in recess to think of and come to a decision. Meanwhile, Max and Chloe walked up to have a word with me. Chloe went first and asked why I was doing this, and why I was hell-bent on ruining her wedding. Well, Max kept a stern face and looked away, anger boiling up inside of him, I could tell. He told me I would come to regret doing this and claiming back my inheritance. I apologized to Chloe that she has to go through this, and I assured her that her part of the inheritance would remain hers, and I was just rightfully taking back what's mine. Update number 2. Recess is over. The judge made a decision. He ruled in my favor and said that, as mentioned in the secret clause of the will, the inheritance would go to me due to the suspicious activity conducted by stepfather. The judge went on to further reprimand my stepdad for his manipulation and lying tactics concerning the money that he acquired so far. The nightmare was finally over for me. I got back my inheritance. My mother's hard-earned money was now rightfully mine. I had yet to decide what to do with it, as first I had important matters to tend to, such as what I should do with my stepdad now. Blocking him everywhere seemed like the right choice, but what about Chloe? I decided to meet with Chloe and talk to her about it. I would even get a chance to tell her my side of the things. I would also offer her some of the money if she needed for the wedding. After all, she was the innocent one in all this. Chloe understood and supported my decision in claiming my inheritance back. However, she was still upset about her dad. I'd cut off all contact with him and his side of the family. They were pissed at me for taking back my money and were mad I'd won the case and left my stepfather with nothing. The court case actually became quite famous amongst the small population of this city. People that knew him. The businesses often turned a blind eye whenever he walked in. My stepdad's family had come to hate me for what I did to him and lied to people about the true details of the case, in order to bring people on their side. However, that did not quite work as planned, as they only got a handful of people to believe in their made-up stories. Things ended for the best, and I still keep in touch with Chloe from time to time. The last I heard of my stepfather was about him struggling to find a proper paying job. It seemed karma had found its way. Wow, Max was probably one of the most evil characters we've seen this week. I mean, taking away OP's inheritance and forcing a court battle. Oh my goodness. I did feel bad for Chloe though. Maybe she did not stand up enough for OP, but at the same time, she was caught in the middle of the feud between OP and her own father. So it was a sticky situation to be in for Chloe, so I don't blame her at all. Let me know your thoughts though. Maybe you feel differently. Drop your comments down below. Let's discuss this one, because this one had a lot to take in. Alright, that's going to be all the content for today. I hope you enjoyed today's stories here on Mr. Redito. If you're new to the channel, I post a story every single day, so there's always something to binge watch. Step on by, see what story we're covering for the day. I'll catch you guys later, and remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya!